In this episode, we are going to conduct a mock interview on configurable and dynamic UI. So welcome back to Check the System Design. We have Shivani Tiwari, a senior UI engineer from Flipkart. She will be talking about how to develop a configurable UI like Flipkart homepage or any e-commerce, you can say web app that can be created using the configuration. So we are going to cover this in depth. So keep watching till the end. There are so many hidden surprises kept in between the video. So don't forget to like and subscribe before you move on. Okay. So welcome to Chakde System Design Series. We have Shivani. Shivani works at Flipkart as a senior software engineer, and she has basically worked around more than 6 years, I think, in Flipkart. Before that, she was working at the Morgan Stanley, if I'm correct. And she has a very great career till now, and she have worked in Flipkart, which I know personally, into multiple, you can say, teams as well. She has exposure from the web to the, you can say, mobile and lot more domain. So I think let her basically allow to talk about her career basically. And we are glad to have Shivani. Basically, she will be giving a mock interview with us. We are glad to have you, Shivani. Yeah.
Thank you, Chirag. Thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure. Uh, for me, I've been in Flipkart for around roughly 6.5 years, and mostly onto the seller and vendor side, wherein it's the system which backs up the consumer platform somewhere. Like there's a channel called as seller.flipkart.com, and there's a channel called vendor.flipkart.com, and worked on these two basically. And then I, from the last roughly 2.5 years, I've been working on the seller app, which is right now 100% React Native app. And that is where I moved from the web to the app part and chose React again. Yeah, that's about it. Now enjoying working onto the new app that we built recently.
So I hope after this video, sellers do not bug you with saying that, dude, I have an issue. Like I know who basically implemented that feature. So let's bug Shivani for that.
They literally bug me right now as well, so shouldn't be a problem.
Oh, okay, that's cool. So any ideas like what we are going to do? Like we are going to have a mock, but any idea what sort of mock we are going to have? Like what will be the topic? Any guesses?
Based on your previous videos, I think I've seen them and probably would be gonna build something, but not sure what.
So let's have that curiosity and let's get started with that. Let's get started with the HLD of very interesting problem. Maybe you may be familiar of that particular thing pre-hand, but let's see where it goes. What we wanted to do, we wanted to build something like Flipkart Home. So when I say something like Flipkart Home, it seems to be like, okay, I have multiple components and I can get it done, right? No, what we have to build a configurable UI where we might have seen on Flipkart on the sales days and for different, you can say, reasons and different people, there are different UI altogether, which is visible on the home page. How that is done? Because it is configurable. You can configure it for different days, different occasions, different reasons, and different folks basically. And that's how your homepage gets rendered. So this is how basically we are going to build today. So what do you want to say about the problem statement?
Okay, I feel like I'm getting shifted to a different team. Moving from a seller side to consumer side is exciting now. I've looked up the problem, have seen it from outside, but never solved it myself. But it should be good to solve it now end to end. Let's see how it goes.
Yeah, let's see where it goes. Yeah. So would you like to get started?
Yeah, sure. So to start with, if we open our Flipkart page, homepage, we have basic two things when we talk about homepage. One is the top search bar, and the account details that we have in there. So I'll just write in what all components do we have when we talk about this page first. So we have a search component over here and a bar, which is, and actually I'll call it a navigation bar on top, which has multiple components like search component. It has something like account details. It has something like your shopping cart,
Mhm.
which gives the details here. 1 second, I'll just. Then comes your section where you have ads placed, which is one of the most important areas. And the ads are different levels.
Mhm.
If I say ads are different levels, as in there are different priorities of the ads. So I
Okay.
just opened up the Flipkart home page and I realized that there is a top priority ad that we have,
Mhm.
and which is kind of which is a carousel.
Mhm.
And then you have different cards, kind of a UI which is actually rendering ads of like different sales or deals of your day, deals of your hour. If you want to donate something, so we have that collaboration, so that is also placed.
Mhm.
And also there's also data coming in, which is a personalized data on what, based on what you bought, what
Mhm.
you might be interested in. So there are
Mhm.
some product items which are showed in this way. And all these items that we see up as ads, there's a common thing between them, that they are mostly the product cards. So
Right. Yeah.
the thing that is common between all of them is, so instead of cards, I'll just write product cards.
Mhm. Okay.
Apart from that, I just saw kind of missed it. Before we have the ads, we have a navigation for all the so I'll just put in here because it actually comes on top, which shows up the categories and subcategories on which Flipkart sells.
Mhm.
So I'll call it as a nav level 2, something like that. This is something which is happening, and this is all about your homepage. This is how it
Yeah.
looks like.
You also talked about
Now,
the recommendation card that will come based on the user. Probably you can write that as well.
yeah, product cards. Recommendation cards. So recommendation cards from a UI perspective, they look pretty much similar.
Correct.
It's just that from the server side, I think when you do the system design, it's basically a different algorithm altogether in order to get the priority of these cards.
Yep.
For a UI component, it is an so when we talk about a card, it's mostly an image. Uh, what is the ad name, or
Mhm.
what is the offer that is being applied, and um, what all products come into that. So it's basically I can say that okay, there is a deals of the day or today's deals are going on, and then they are applied on category of apparels, or they're applied on sunglasses or electronics on some areas. So
Mhm.
these kind of details are probably mentioned. So this is the overall view on what happens on the homepage roughly.
Got it. So
Is
basically,
the
the things which you talked about are the your functional requirements, right?
right.
So, okay. I think these are good enough in terms of building any, you can say, product or the page like Flipkart, which has the dynamic thing that you talked about, lot of card, and obviously the navbar and lot more thing. Okay, this is cool. Let's quickly see the Flipkart homepage which Shivani was talking about. So in this particular case, if you see, you have a search, you have certain configuration, you have certain visits over here, right? These are the different project landing visit. So you have a banner which is a kind of a carousel, right? So you have another banner which have option for a different bank promotion. You have another top offer visit, which is again a configuration, and you see there is a different kind of promotion which is going on. There are different ads and promotions which are done by the different brands, which you can see over here, and different deals, different sort of visits, and different sort of banners which are present, right? And different kind of layouts as well. So if you have to basically design each and every these banner every time there is a new offer or new promotion or new kind of thing that need to be rendered, it is going to be very hectic. So if this is a configuration based, depending on the locale, depending on the location, depending on the like user, you can customize this depending on the offer time. You can do a lot more thing, right? That too without making any change on the UI. So how that is done, she will be talking in more detail. Now, what about the non-functional requirement? What you wanted to
Sure.
cover? Yeah.
From the non-functional requirement perspective, the first thing that comes into my mind is performance. It
Mm-hmm.
has to be really fast, and it has to be really fast on all kinds of browsers.
Mm-hmm.
People use M-Site, people use 3G, 4G, and now tier 3 cities have also, forget about tier 3 cities, but villages have also started exploring things on Flipkart, and the network there is low. So performance is topmost priority of this homepage, because the moment the page is frozen or if it doesn't load on time, people will move out. It doesn't take, generally the standard norm is of 3 seconds, that it should load within the 3 seconds. And then, however, when it comes to such an e-commerce site where people are coming, this is something which within a second, if it doesn't load, it might get into negative business impact. So that is the first non-functional and most important requirement. The second thing is change of configuration.
Note it down as well, right? So that
yes,
we don't
sure.
Perfect.
We will write performance first time load is what I would call it. From like technical standpoint, this would be something like first contentful paint and then time to interactive. These are the things that we would be looking at.
We can definitely dig if required. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. Now, the next requirement, as we talked about it, that there are different sales, there are different things which are launching every single day, at every minute, or maybe at every single moment. And it is all driven by the business. Correct. That is wherein, from a technical standpoint, our page should be configurable in the terms that it can change when there is any requirement to change it. Like if the sale started, you are into probably the most common sale of ours is Big Billion Day sale, right? So if there is a Big Billion Day view, which is a little lighter mode, and the moment you enter into that 12 o'clock Big Billion Days, you see that the whole UI gets in a party mode.
Yeah, literally at the same moment. Right? The point is at the same moment, because if it is not available for a couple of minutes, probably folks will lose the capability to purchase the good deals.
Right. Yeah. Right. So that is something which is most important. And so I'll just write it down. You have to. Instant change of config is what we can.
Sure.
That is something which we can look at. And the next thing is there are different consumer base is very, very big, right? So based on the consumer base, there are a lot of experiments that we want to run. So it should be something which can support your A/B experiments. Is what I feel. So these are the basic things which are right now coming into my mind on why or what are our non-functional requirements. I think we can dig deeper into these.
Definitely. I think you talked about one of the things when you were discussing about, like, either those will be like rendered from the server when you were talking about the recommendation card, right? So maybe you wanted to talk about the client side and the server side rendering that you were talking in the recommended.
Yes, I think we'll discuss. Sure. We can discuss it in the approach. Well, let's look at all the 3-4 approaches that we have, because there are different rendering algorithms, and then let's figure out that which one would be the best suited for our requirements here.
Great. So I think this is good enough. Maybe like if we talk about what basically we can look into, everything is definitely not possible because just to constrain the time. Let's focus on which is configurable related, the ads and the stuff that we wanted to render, and probably some of the non-functional requirement which we can pick, right? So maybe the config and the performance is something we can definitely dig into. So okay, what's next?
So let's try and first, the way I'm thinking is to divide this problem into a smaller chunk. The first term that we have been talking about from since we started is the configurability. So we want to have a layout which is configurable enough. And which renders based on some kind of data provided to the page. Correct. Right? So let's dig a little bit deeper into how we can do that. So how we can have a layout which can support this kind of properties. So the way I'm thinking, like the data that we have is in the JSON format. So when it comes to JSON format data, there are different things that we are building now. You can have a list. Right now, let's start small. And the way I'm thinking is there are different layers. The first layer is your main ad of carousel. The second layer is of your sales card. The third layer is of your recommendations card. So these are different types, if I understand that. So the different types that we have is, probably I'll call it as a sales card. I'm not sure what exactly it is called as. I can say a carousel or top level ad. And I have something like
Okay.
So based on these, so these are kind of acting as your configs for your cards or what you want to render. If you want some other carousel to come below probably a recommendations card, it should be swappable immediately, because you, as we told, that there are A/B experiments should ultimately run on those.
Correct.
So the way I'm thinking, there is a config, and in the config you are putting up an array which is actually defining the sequence of how the elements would be put up. In the first, the element, there would be a type. The type would be, I'm writing 2 right here because 2 is the carousel card.
Sure.
The second, in interest of time, basically, I will have something like type 1. So this is my sales card or whatever else we have. So this is the first level of config that we have. Now, if you have a sales card or if you have a carousel, what is the next item that you put in a carousel? In a carousel, it's simply a set of images and a set of ads that you have on the images. Okay, so again, it would be the, I would put something like this, that I have certain kinds of images over here. I have some image link. I have some image ID. I have some, what else do we have? Let me just open Flipkart and see if there is.
Sure.
That's the only thing I can see right now. It's just a sequence of images that's running. For the next level, I have, yeah. For the next level type, these are basically the IDs. When I say type 1, type 2, I'll probably put an ID to a kind of card, that a kind of panel that I want to build in. I can have something like title is present over here. Along with the title, do you have a subtitle or anything that you want to write, which might be kind of an optional thing. Now, with subtitle, now you have the content. And when we talk about the content, you have all the ads that is coming in. And in the ads, you again, you can think of all the images, or name it as items as of now, and each item has again image, image URL maybe, and ID maybe, and so this is the way we would build up a form, like a form which we know that it is horizontal in nature. Sorry, a vertical in nature, which will have different items, and within horizontal you have different other components, like we call this content for the item here, right?
Got it.
And the content, yeah.
Basically, with this, what you are saying, you can have different visits and different components, basically, which are going to be rendered in the vertical stack. So you just pass the data, you have a type, based on that you are mapping a particular, you can say, component that gets rendered based on the data, and you have vertical stacking of those, right?
Right. So even if I want to change anything, like if I change from type 1 to type 2, or only have carousel in my whole page, I should be able to do that, irrespective of, so that is how I'm going to control it on the client side. That my form, whatever this JSON is telling me, I'll render only that. I won't render anything apart from that. So that is something which will make it as configurable as possible. If the business teams wants to change the ads, if they want to change any view of it, and these are something which are predefined. And these, apart from that, so there's something which would build up your form. Now there are different layouts apart from, so let's build a one level above what we are already doing. So this is a simple configurable card. Now I think we move to the layouts part. And in the layouts part, I want to make it even more configurable, saying that there are sometimes items on the left and ad on the right, or ad on the left and items on the right. So, and I want to make that part as also configurable.
So your layout can be horizontally and vertically both, right? What you meant by. So
Yes.
now the complexity actually comes. You are also caring about the layouts, not just the stacking of the individual component with the configuration. Cool. Let's talk about that. Yeah.
So this is where it becomes more interesting, wherein if you see the second item was simply put in as a type 1, and as a title and subtitle were added, and it was assumed that whatever content I'm building is in horizontal in nature. But what I can say that what is the alignment? I can actually put in what is the alignment type you're looking for, either horizontal or vertical. Post that, for a particular content that we are having here, the content is something wherein I would also want to define what is the size wherein you want to render it with. Okay, there is a particular width and there is a particular height that you want to render. So if the alignment is horizontal, then we know that it's going to be scrolling horizontally. So what I need is how much vertical height do you need? So in that case, you'll have something like height. And in case of your alignment is vertical in nature, you would want to know that if there are, like vertical, it is scrolling well, but how much width would you want to take it from the, right? So both are, one of these should definitely be present is what I'm thinking about. Okay. This way you are making it even more configurable in terms of what comes first, what comes last. Next is what I'm thinking about is, you have your cards done, you have your vertical and horizontal stuff done. When we talk about the recommendations card, it's this is the part which is like very, very interesting to me, because this is a level wherein the ads can go up to any level. If I try to explain it, this is the way it might look like. I have a card. Within the card, I have some XYZ object with particular ID or particular alignment. When I say alignment, I have all the children. Let's change the items or the content to something like children, which is a more generic term, so that we make it more configurable. When I have children, I can say that, okay, my children again have some multiple, these are my child nodes over here. And within the child nodes, I can say a very similar structure, wherein I can say that this is my ID, this is my alignment, and these are probably my child nodes. So what I'm trying to build here is, there can be n number of nesting. There can be children within the children. There is a structure. So what you can think about it, I'm using the canvas.
Okay.
You can think about it like a box. A box, you might say that I want to put something vertically aligned over here. Sorry. And then again, I have something like this. And then this is vertically aligned. I might have two options. One where I say that I want to again vertically align two items and put an ad which looks something like this, versus there is an option where I can put it like this, something like this.
Correct.
Sorry for the diagram. Yeah,
it's okay. I get that. So basically, you're trying to convey you have a nested configuration where your parents are vertically aligned, but internal childs can take a decision either I want to align vertically or horizontally. Cool. Right. Yeah, this is an actual next level of configuration, which is mostly required in your real world applications. Yeah.
No, so this is something wherein I have to make it configurable enough in the sense that the way ads can come, like with their height and deciding upon whether the height, setting up their height and width, I can make any view possible. It is just a kind of a view which contains certain other boxes inside it, and that division is something which is controlled by the data which is coming in. It is not controlled. Nothing is statically decided over here. So that's the whole point. Now, I think this is all about what I think the first part of problem that we were planning to build. The next important part that I'm thinking of is, now let's move to the tech stack, wherein how do we solve this problem and how do we build all of it? We have the config, we know that we'll build this config, and based on the config we'll render pages, but how exactly it happens, I think we can move out there. Sure. So the first requirement that I'll touch upon the first requirement that we have on whether it would be client-side rendered stuff or server-side rendered stuff, and why it would be whatever decision we take. So let's try both the approaches here. The first approach that we'll try is probably client-side. You pick up, I'll take React as something which I'm comfortable with. This is the tech stack. You can take Next.js, and there are many available, and that does most of the tasks that React also does. So but for my this thing, I'll choose React. In React, I would first of all, let's try with the CSR. And in CSR, what I understand is that I have different bundles. I have different chunkings available, right? And with those bundles and chunkings, what's happening is I am planning to put something on the page. Now, what happens is the first time the call goes to Flipkart.com, I'm trying to get the chunks, put it there, and then the tree is getting rendered. Your whole DOM tree is getting rendered. After that, your JavaScript is getting processed. And when everything of that happens, then is the point when your app is visible and your site is visible and is interactable. Now, most of the data that is coming out of here is server-driven data. This page, specifically the home page that we are talking about, there is nothing predefined over here which I can render without the server information. And that is when I would move out from the CSR solution and would try to see if SSR is the right approach. And wherein the traditional, there are actually a lot of misconceptions that I know of SSR. People think that rendering the JSP pages, which used to happen like long back, and many legacy applications still do it, is the definition of the SSR, right? Server-side rendering. However, what happens there is, if for every request or every page change or anything that you're doing, you send a request to the server, and from the server, your data comes in along with your page. However, this is a traditional SSR when we talk about, and this also, when I try to put it onto our homepage solution, is not working out well. What we want is something which is a combination of that. I want to load in something. I want some part of it to be decided by the server, some part of it to be directly available, some part of it to be interactive immediately, and some part of it to be interactive. It's okay when it is interactive later. If I talk about it, the first element that I see on the homepage, like the search bar, I want search bar to be rendered first, because there are two intentions by which customers come, is what I believe, to Flipkart. One is the consumer who just wants to scroll and search on what's happening around, which is basically your ad or the whole homepage is something which is going to help out that kind of a consumer. The second kind of consumer, and this kind of consumer has a little bit of time available because they are just exploring what's up and what's new items and what sales. Yeah, what sales are available and everything. The second kind of person has a very straightforward intention wherein they know what to buy. They just type in and search in that product and just go ahead and buy it immediately. That is the second segment, and that is wherein our search bar becomes important. And this person who is actually trying to search and directly buy has probably lesser time than the person who wants to explore stuff. So that is the reason I think that's something which I'm thinking, like that's the reason probably what I would do is first thing, render the top bar with the search option available, and want to make it as interactive as possible, like want to make it interactive as soon as possible.
Got it.
This is something, and post that, the second thing which I want is to load up the entire page. The reason being, the second or the another kind of consumer who wants to explore, wants to see up data. That person doesn't want the page to be interactive as soon as possible, but they want to see everything the moment it loads, right? So for them, now this data is coming based on some personalized stuff, like what have you already searched or what have you already bought in the past. So it's mostly server driven. Also, the format of ads and everything is also something which is coming in from what you call it as a backend, right? We were talking about is SSR and how traditional SSR is something which also is not an optimal solution on what we are thinking about. Now, thanks to React 18, we have a new solve coming in. So I'm thinking that that should solve a problem, and that is something which would help us in selective hydrating. So this is the concept that at least I think should one of the best approaches to render your homepage, wherein
Mhm.
the way we talked about, I want to render certain parts of it, not all parts of it, and make it interactive meanwhile, right?
Yeah.
I don't want whole page to load and then be non-interactive and then get directly and make it interactive at one point,
Mhm.
because that is the solution which is not working for us. So at least in React, what we have is when you do an SSR, you do render to string, and this render to string is something which is send the HTML directly, and the whole client-side code and the view gets rendered from that.
Mhm.
Now, I'm thinking here we can move away from this render to string,
Mhm.
and then I could move to something like streaming option that React 18 provides,
Got
and
it.
that is your pipe to node stream.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
what this basically does is it basically starts streaming the HTML before all your elements are actually in there.
Mhm.
So that is probably the philosophy that I would use, so that the elements are already there. When they reach, I can make them interactive, and meanwhile I can lazy load all the other elements which can be shown up on the screen.
Got it.
So that's the overall idea on what I'm thinking towards. Hope that's
Yeah,
the
I
purpose
like
of
the
the
idea
part.
what you proposed. So as you compared the three things, basically you talked about the client side rendering where you get individual chunk, you get a config, you have to wait for the config, you get individual chunk, then render those chunk and the combination of that config on the UI. Definitely it is going to be very computation heavy. Now you talked about other part where you have your server knows that this is a config. You give me entire page altogether using that config. But again, that entire page can be very heavy. The approach that you proposed is obviously awesome, which is you give me the parsed value, but only the selected one. Don't give me the entire page parsed. I will tell you only these sections. Once you're ready, just keep me piping in, start streaming, and I will start showing to the user, and those sections are interactive. Yeah, that's a cool thing, and I think that React 18 is basically bringing this very cool feature too. We are going to talk about very interesting concept, which is client-side rendering, server-side rendering, combination of client-side rendering and server-side rendering, static rendering and pre-rendering. Hold with me, this is going to basically change the way you think about how to create a web app, right? Now, before we jump into what is this client-side, server-side, and basically understanding the pre-rendering and the static rendering, let's try to understand very basic and the fundamental things which is going to help you in order to understand this important thing. So first thing first, what is the server side? So consider example, you are requesting for I wanted a login page or I want a dashboard. This is a request which goes from a browser to the server. Now your server basically does some certain things. What it does, it basically processes the request for this particular route, which is /login and /dashboard. It generates the HTML, it generates the relevant JavaScript and everything, and it ships, right? So your server got a responsibility to generate and ship for each and every route where the user is requesting for. This is basically a server side rendering. Every route, every request goes to server decide what need to be rendered, and it gives you the final HTML that need to be rendered. Now, coming to the second part, which is our client side rendering. In this particular case, what your server gives the JS respective, you can say CSS and all sort of thing. Now, your browser does certain things. What it does, browser start understanding the routing. So say suppose is the similar example, someone was on the dashboard, the home page slash, now he wanted to go into the login. Now, in order to get the data or the HTML for /login, your browser is not going to make a request to the server. Your browser is capable enough to understand there is something called /login, and I should basically get the data from the local chunks altogether. Although while rendering it require any extra JavaScript or chunk, it can go to the server, that is different thing. But for your routing purpose, your landing page, which is required in order to do the routing, you don't need any server in order to tell you for this particular route, you need different asset. No, everything is managed on the client. Okay. Now, what are these things which are in between? Let's try to understand, and we'll understand its benefit and which one to use and when to use, what all you can do. Static SSR. What it meant by, when basically you are building your application, when you are writing something like npm run build or doing the similar kind thing on the server, what it does, say suppose you are creating some blog, and you know you have thousands or say suppose 100 pages with a static data, what you can do, you can build those 100 web pages all together, and you can put that web pages directly on your browser, so that anytime a web page is requested, you basically go and serve that static web page directly from the server. Okay, this is cool, right? Because there is no dynamic thing, no API request. We can avoid a lot of things, and you can directly serve the already pre-generated web page, right? The second thing, which is again very popular, people call it server-side rendering with rehydration. What it meant by, you might have used React or Angular by using the server-side rendering. What it does, it creates a web page. It's basically generate your HTML, but that HTML needs some events to be there, right? Say suppose you have a form. In form, you wanted to add some event handling on change of this, on blur of that, on different events are there. You want those events to also work. But on the server, your server don't understand these events. What it will do, it will generate this HTML and it will give to the browser. Now, browser have a responsibility to rehydrate it. Rehydrate in a sense, you have given me HTML and I know the events which need to be binded. I will bind these events so that your web page become interactive now. Before hydration, your web page is not interactive. So this is basically called your server-side rendering with the rehydration. Now, there is another concept which is called client-side rendering with the pre-rendering. What does it mean by? This is very interesting concept. What it says that I'm not going to basically render everything on the server. What I'm going to do, I'm going to just give you a shell and it will have the basic HTML and things rendered. Rest of the things client is going to take care of in order to render. But over here, any dependency which you have in terms of the JS, in terms of the CSS or anything which need to be loaded at a faster rate, I will make sure I get those dependency and inject those dependency in your web page itself, so that when you are doing a client-side rendering on the client, on the browser, you don't have to look for those dependencies. Those can be made advanced, right? This is very cool. Now, you will find a lot of the old application that was built on the 100% server-side rendering. You will find a lot of application which is like on the pure, you can say, client-side rendering. And there are a lot of application which are blog related, which are built on the server side, the static server side rendering and using the rehydration. So there are two very popular these days, these mechanisms which people are using. One is client side rendering with the pre-rendering mechanism and the server side rendering with the rehydration mechanism, right? These are two ways which is very popular. Let's try to understand a couple of more important things over here. What are those? First, let's try to see who is basically using it. In this particular case, you can see the Gmail was using it very actively. Even you see the static one, the Netflix was using for a lot of the static pages. The server-side rendering with the rehydration, you can say Next.js is built on the same concept, and even the Razor is based on the same concept. So client-side rendering with the you can say pre-rendering, this is used by Gatsby and the ViewPress, and full you can say client-side rendering is used by most of the application, right? So although there are a lot of strategies in terms of the Gmail is also trying to use, you can say client-side rendering with the pre-rendering, like these are the different applications or the companies which keep on experimenting and trying between the lot between. Now, there are a couple of things that we have to understand. What is the cost of these different mechanisms, right? The first one, which is server-side rendering, it is going to cost you a lot in terms of your infra size. Reason, every request need to be handled from the server. Second, this is going to cost you in terms of when you are building and you have to keep all those assets on your browser. Your storage is basically going to be very costly. In terms of server-side rendering with the rehydration, your infra cost is going to be costly, and you have to basically think about the JS size as well, right? Because infra cost, because most of the request basically is going to be on the server, and that need to be rehydrated on the client side, right? This is going to cost you JavaScript, because you just get the cell and rest everything is basically going to be costly operation in terms of the JavaScript need to be loaded and a lot more. This is 100% you can say JavaScript, because the server takes care of nothing. It will just give you the HTML, and from there the parsing, loading, rendering, getting those JSs and rendering on the web page. Everything is taken on the client. Now, along with that, this is very interesting, which is time to interactivity is as close your, you can say, first contentful paint. Although this is very recommended, if you have your time to interactivity and your first contentful paint very close, this is very good, right? It is almost equivalent. And in this particular case, you can see this is also equivalent, but your TTFB is very fast in this particular case, right? So time to get your first bite, which is again, this is a flexible approach. You can do a lot of things in terms of the SSR with the hydration. This is again doing a CSR with the pre-rendering is something which you can leverage. You can do a lot of optimization over here. So just go through this and try out these different things. You will definitely find, depending on your use cases, you are going to leverage a lot of stuff over here.
Be good, and we can now discuss on how this whole system would work and how these widgets and everything would work, right?
Sure. You can talk about HLD basically, right?
Yes, let's talk
Okay.
about how high level. What I'm thinking is you have something, so you have some predefined, what I can think of. It's, I'm actually make it a little bigger. So I have all these widgets, right? And these widgets are something which are predefined, which will actually define, which are actually listening to your, these are actual components which are listening to your configs and rendering, responsible for rendering of the page. And this is something which I would probably call as a widget master or widget container maybe. So this is how it would look like now from your configurations perspective. There's a config that is coming in from your, where is your config setting? This. And this config is coming to the server. Now there is something which, now I have the UI something available which is responsible for creating the view, displaying the view. I have something which will control my view. Now I need something which will actually define, what is this? Sorry. Where do you have boxes? Shapes here. Sorry. So I need something called as a parser. And this parser is gonna take up my config, take up the data from config, pick up and use whatever is there in my widgets, and then probably give you out a particular structure. This is what is your final HTML or the page which would be responsible to give you, which would be a combination, which would be the final output of how a page should look like.
Got it.
And this is something which is again, so there's one more thing that we discussed over here, and that is the A/B experiments now, right? Now with the A/B experiments, I feel it should be sitting somewhere over here. Let me, yeah. So I have different configurations, and I have something called probably as an A/B service. Now with this A/B service, this A/B service is going to define whether you want to use config 1 or config 2, which config is exactly coming to you. So I'll pull in the data into my parser, and this is also that is gonna, so this data is also going in here ultimately from the parser, probably because there are different widgets that we are creating. It might happen that we have different A/B experiments running onto it. And with each experiment, I think I'll have to pull in the config and I have to decide that, okay, widget 1 is from config A, widget 2 is something from config X, widget 3 is something which is of a different configuration. That is how you allow multiple experiments to simultaneously begin. And that is the task of parser, is what I believe, wherein the parser would become very important for us.
Got it. I like the overall idea when you say you have a config, you have your widgets, which contains a lot of different component as a widget. You have a parser. You give this config, you give this entire widget. Your parser is going to define on based on this config what all widget basically I need to use and finally generate the HTML that you want. Again, the other part which you talked about, your A/B wala part, which is again awesome, right? based on the different, as we say, like after some time I wanted to launch something else, or some for different folks I wanted to launch something different, right? This config, if you change the config, your HTML is going to automatically change because you have a superset of widget. I like the idea, the way you presented. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Now, another thing that we have in our requirements that what is missing is your instant change of config. So I think that is the final part wherein, and that is where parser even becomes interesting. I wouldn't call parser as a single component, but it would be group of components where it will have different responsibilities inside it. That is how I would decide it. One which is taking care of your AB, one which is, sorry, this line, one which is taking care probably of what is the, and what's the final mode or the final config. So it's kind of a config of configs, kind of a complex structure that I'm imagining over here. And wherein I can say that, okay, in BBD mode, this all the set of configs doesn't apply, X, Y, Z doesn't apply, however, X dash, Y dash, like these apply on a particular sale or on a particular mode. And that is when I would decide to send this data instantly. Like this would be the data that would be available when a person.
Got it. So basically you're saying you have certain rules which is defined inside your parser, which says that for something instant and for something very critical, I don't want any extra things to happen. Basically, I wanted to focus on very, very critical pieces, which helps me to at least get things rendered and visible to the users as soon as possible. Actually, that's a good idea. Yeah.
Cool. Now let's move on to how we want to implement that. Is that okay? Does this
looks good? This looks good. The high level diagram of how you're configurable of anything as a matter, right? So say suppose we have to build any custom forms, dynamic forms, anything customizable which is dependent on the config can be very easily driven by this example, right? Where your visit can be individual form fields probably, and you have a parser, you have a config which says that you need 3 fields of different type and different layout. Just give me the final output. This is awesome. Yeah.
Right. So apart from this, the final implementation that I'm thinking about is there has to be multiple servers that because the way I'm thinking is still in the sense that you have a microservice architecture, at least within Flipkart, and that is something which has been working pretty well. You have different inputs coming in from different servers, and then the final API. Let me draw another thing that how this whole architecture will work probably. I have this final server or the server which is providing the data to my client, okay, and which is responsible for hosting the pages. Now, in the interest of time, like from the UI perspective, I'm removing that ELB and all the stuff.
Yeah.
Right? This server is gonna, the kind of API that I'm imagining for this server would be something like this is the JSON. So your server is, so this is your front end, and here your parser is sending you this data. Okay, you have this, all the configurations available, and this is actually telling you, let me put it, no, I think it will be part of the server wherein, let me redraw it. This is not. So all of it that we talk about, the generation of HTML and listening to all configs and everything would be something which would be part of the server. And this is what would be sending you the HTML file, right? This block is something which is being sent to the client. So probably this is something which I'm imagining.
Sure.
The kind of structure would be, the client would simply say to give the data irrespective of, and would give session, the sessions would be attached to it if this person is logged in. If the person is not logged in, then session won't be attached, and then the server would decide based on that on what exactly to be shown. Because on the home page, irrespective of whether you're logged in or not, the similar kind of you are still able to see the ads, you are still able to see what products are available, and this page doesn't change a lot. It's not so what usually in a typical website, what happens is within if I see outside of Flipkart or any typical application, if you're not logged in, you just see a login page and nothing else.
Correct.
And if you're logged in, then only you get to see all these pages. However, when it comes to Flipkart, if you're not logged in, then also you would have all the experiences, Just that the data that is coming in from the server is something which would be different, because your personalized data or the recommendations card that we were talking about, right? That is something which would not pop up as you are logged in. So that is something which this server would decide and finally give up this data and finally render the HTML, right? So now the server needs to get this configs, and the configs is something which we discussed on how the structure would look like. I think that's pretty much it. Do we need anything else? I'm thinking.
I think we are good on this particular part. Probably we also talked about CSR and SSR in terms of the perf thing. You also talked about the AB thing. I think we are good over here. So yeah, you also talked about the configuration probably that you may need in the config over here. And definitely these visit are something which is internal implementation, which is just going to use this config in order to basically render based on the config which is present. And I'm expecting your parser is something which is just loop around the config, find out the respective visit, and just keep on building some dynamic component which have a combination of all the configured visits basically, right?
Right. That is something which I'm thinking about. And I think we pretty much have the page ready and our homepage is there. Hopefully it is performant enough the way you thought it to be.
Yeah, definitely. This definitely works. So yeah, I think this is good enough, pretty much good. Okay, so maybe like there are a couple of things probably, like this is for other folks who are watching this, probably they can think about if they have to basically do some caching. Like there is the same config basically for the same user. If you are basically re-rendering again and again, do you really want your server to do the heavy lifting which was already done by the server, right?
Okay.
So
okay. Coming on to that part specifically, I think it is done in most of the applications now. That is something which is a service worker implementation, right?
Correct. So this is also a question mark to the people who are watching, so that they can just think, is it okay for a server to do this, or they wanted to cache somewhere on the server or the client where they can leverage the things which are already passed, probably.
Right. And service, it's not just about the performance, but also about availability when the person is offline. Like, so when the person is offline, you definitely want your users not to lose on the data. They would still see ads, and probably if the network glitch is there, and that glitch is not visible when you're using the app and you're actually working on Flipkart. So that's something that's one of the most important aspects. There are a lot more aspects when it comes to like designing this. It's not just about this page. When we talk about the system, then like a lot of security aspects would come into picture, your logins and everything. And it's a whole different topic when I say that you want to log in with Gmail, log in with OTP, and all of it, and want to set up performance for the site specifically and not for this particular page.
That's true. And one more thing which I generally have seen, especially when you have a configurable thing, when you talk about accessibility, that is next level, because now you have to define your accessibility at the dynamic real time, right? You don't know what order, what things can be there on your web page and how you are going to make everything accessible, right? So that comes with a different challenges, but yeah, those are the different good challenges to solve basically on the real world problem statement.
Absolutely right. Apart from this, like on the homepage, you also have features like notifications are also available. So that's another topic. Like you can go on and on for like multiple hours when it comes about.
That's really true. Yeah. So I think, yeah, it was nice to have you over here. And I think folks who are watching this, they have got a very good idea about any configurable thing. And I think most of the folks are going to benefit from here. So thanks a lot, Shivani, for coming down and actually sharing your knowledge on the Chakde system design. I feel like this is going to be a great forum for folks who are actually looking for the senior positions going forward. So yeah, thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure if I can help anyone. Because in our interviews as well, I expect people to at least touch upon a lot of things when it comes to performance and security and availability and accessibility, like all of it.
I think you're preparing folks to come down in your interviews well prepared, so that you can have a healthy discussion instead of just one-way communication that used to happen.
I would love to. I actually sign out, like if given a chance, I would actually tell a person that, okay, first, do you want to try this out and then probably it's the best part.
Yeah, actually, that would be great. So people who are just listening, make sure if Shivani is going to take your interview, just peep into this video. This is going to be very helpful. I hope you got some new learning about the configurable UI. So if you like the video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe and comment, and keep watching Chakde System Design.